Hello to another episode on the NusratTalks Podcast. I am Nusrat Nasim Meraji, and today I have with me a beautiful human being who I am going to let her do most of the introducing herself. However, what I do want to say is that Zarifa and I have known each other for, I think, almost 15 years or more now,
Yeah.
and we have had, I think, the most beautiful starts of our journeys together that I can think of. And it all adds up at this stage of life because of who we are as human beings and who we've become and how it's all shaped us. But I'm going to leave that for later. First of all, I just want to say thank you so much for making the time, Zarifa. This means the world to me.
Of course. I love having conversations with you. I feel like we always touch on such important topics. So this is a pleasure and a privilege.
Absolutely. This is the pleasure and privilege is all mine. And I absolutely cannot wait for people to hear what we have to say. So obviously, like I said, to the viewers, this episode is going to be in both Bangla and English, because
Gosh.
we do want our Bangla speaking folks to tune in as well. And because the gems I can already tell that's going to come out of this is just brilliant. So once again, Zarifa, তোমাকে অনেক 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 ধন্যবাদ যে তুমি সময় দিলা. And yes, I would love for you to tell us a little bit about where you're based at the moment and কি কাজের মধ্যে আছো, অথবা পড়ালেখা চললে কোথায় চলছে, কি চলছে basically life এ.
Right. So right now I live in America. So I'm based in the South in Atlanta, Georgia. And currently in my professional life, I work as a compliance analyst. It's not all that interesting, but I do a lot of activist work here. I work with local organizations and I work with all sorts of different people. But my actual passion is law school. So right now I'm in the tail end of law school. Hopefully, I'm going to graduate soon, and then I plan to work within immigration in some capacity. And I'm also a creative. So like you said, I write a lot. You can find me on Instagram. My Instagram is Zaza_Riri_. And I think of myself as a writer first and foremost. So
Oh,
if you go on my Instagram and watch my stories, you'll see that I usually have a lot to say. Knowing my activist background, my law school background, I always have a lot to say. So check me out on there. I'm also on TikTok if anybody wants to follow me there. It's the same username. It's Zaza_Riri. And yeah, I'm excited to dive right into our conversations because obviously I like to keep up with all these like important topics and all the,
yeah.
fun stuff that's going on around the world these days. So yeah, let's go. Let's
I
get to it.
love that. And something you said, you think of yourself first and foremost as a writer. Amar jonno, you are first and foremost a writer. And this is where I want to tell people how we know each other. So Zarif and I, back in 2009, 10, 2009, 10, 11, 12, we were working together. Amra Bangladesher একটা leading English lifestyle magazine জন্য লিখতাম. We both worked together there as contributors and then part of the editorial team. And that's how we found each other. And that's why I also said that it is so amazing how we've always been in and out of each other's lives, but as happened to most of the world, when the world started watching things unfold after October 7th in Palestine, like we found ourselves going back to the community that we feel most like we belong to. And that's when Jarifa and I reconnected again. And yeah, but coming back to the point, for me, also Zarifa সবচেয়ে আগে একটা writer, and then তারপর when I think of her, like as a lawyer. And also, by the way, can I just say, I can't wait to see you as a lawyer. Oh my God, মানে কিছু কিছু মানুষ আছে যাদের certain professions pursue করা উচিত. Zarifa is the kind of person যার অবশ্যই law pursue করা উচিত because her heart is absolutely in the right place. I mean, I can just see how that all is gonna play out, and I can't wait to see you do that. Anyways, let's dive right into it. So আমি একটা জিনিস দিয়ে যেটা শুরু করতে চাই সেটা হচ্ছে যে আমাদের shared time at the magazine that we worked at, right? And it was such a big part of not just us becoming the writers that we are today, but I also like to think about the fact that অনেক seeds ওই টাইমে আমাদের মাথায় plant হয়েছিল in relation to the work that we did, in relation to the write-ups that we did, the stories that we covered, যেখানে human rights এর aspectটা অনেক really did stand up, right? So I would love to hear about how the magazine and your time, not just at the magazine, but ওই time you were writing regularly, right? Journalist Zarifa was like at the peak. So how would you say যে ওই টাইমের experience covering the stories that you did cover back then, would you say that that played a part in the Zarifa that we see today in terms of fearlessness and courage?
I think when we're looking specifically at fearlessness and courage, it wasn't quite what I was writing that, made me feel like I was utilizing courage and having to be fearless in a sense. It was more so the environment that we were in, because I'm sure a lot of people will agree with this, but being a woman and working at a premier corporate style place in Dhaka it presents its own kind of challenges, right? And you have to have a certain level of fearlessness, a certain level of tenacity, I would say, to work in such environments where a lot of the time people would look at us as like, oh, these are just some young girls, they don't look at us as workers or journalists. I think some of the very important things that we learned from that premier lifestyle magazine, যেটা দিনের পর দিন we had to learn, um, from our own environment was যে you're going to come in contact with all sorts of people, right? তুমি অনেক মানুষের সাথে উঠা বসা করবা, and you're going to have to learn a lot from them on how to interact, how to work in such environments. And journalism is collaboration, right?
Mm,
তুমি যখন যেকোনো কিছু লিখতেছো for a premier magazine that hundreds, thousands of people are going to read, you have to work with your team.
yeah,
And so I think what you and I learned during that time was how to get along with these different kinds of people, some of whom don't always take us seriously, right? Some of them
yeah,
would look at us and be like, এরা তো ছোট মেয়ে, ওরা স্কুলে পড়তেছে এখনো, তারা কি করবে? Right? Like we don't have to take them seriously. And I know you and I encountered those kinds of attitudes quite often.
yeah,
But, the important thing was not to let other people's attitudes or how we were being perceived affect our work. And I
yeah,
think in the end, you and I were able to, learn a lot about who we are, what kind of workers we are, what kind of journalists we are, like, from working in that environment. So I think it wasn't particularly what I was writing because I always had faith. I knew what I wanted to write. I knew what I wanted to put out in the world, but it was about learning the other parts of being a journalist that I took from those experiences.
yeah, absolutely. And also what you said, যে কথাটা বললে না যে উঠা বসা করতে হয় একটা ওটা একটা পার্ট, and then আরেকটা পার্ট ছিল which was so real যে being taken seriously. কারণ আমার conversation আমরা একটা ট্রিগার করেছিলাম with একজন high official in the establishment about how commuter যে costa and everything, হ্যাঁ, transporter costa and everything, and I remember আমাদের এরকমও শুনতে হয়েছিল যে first of all তোমরা মেয়ে, so like it's also তোমাদের family's responsibility to ensure তোমার safety. So কেন তোমাদের অফিস থেকে নিতে হবে? So এই জিনিসটা মানে এই যে professionalism এর completely বাইরে এসে putting our genders first and foremost above everything. I think for me personally, and I would love to know if you agree or disagree, but আমার জন্য that moment was a very huge defining moment in my life, right?
Women in Bangladesh, they face that from both ends. So Not only do we face it at work, আমরা কাজেও গেলে we're still treated like, oh, এরা তো ছোট মেয়ে. But also on from our families, and sometimes I remember we had a colleague, একজন ছিল, um, she confided in me, আমাকে বলছিল যে কাজের থেকে we sent her to an event, and she was experiencing some pushback from her family, and she was saying যে আমার বাসা থেকে তারা বুঝতে চাচ্ছে না যে এটা আমার কাজ। আমার যেতে হবে এরকম ইভেন্টে। মাঝে, মাঝে রাতেও তো ইভেন্ট হয়।
হ্যাঁ,
And she's like, "I have to go to these events. This is my work." And she would always tell me about how ওর বাসা থেকে ওর আব্বু-আম্মু যেটা ন্যাচারাল, ওরা চিন্তা করত যে একলা মেয়ে বের হচ্ছে এরকম রাতের বেলা ঢাকায়। Of course, you have to use discernment and you have to be careful, but at the same time, this is her work. She is a grown adult. She's being paid to do this job, and it was sometimes difficult for even my family or our colleagues' families to understand
yeah,
they're work professionals,
yeah.
right?
And,
So
and once again, when you think about it, আমাদের দেশে, when we are raised, it's like this is where, you know how people say যে মেয়েরা ছেলেদের আগে ম্যাচিওর হয়, একটা এজ গ্যাপ থাকলে ভালো, কারণ ছেলেদের ম্যাচুরিটি দেরি করে আসে. Really? You wonder why? Because you're putting us on the forefront. আমাদেরকে তো ছোটবেলার থেকে অনেক কিছু আছে যেগুলা মানে কন্ডিশন করে দেওয়া হচ্ছে, বেশিরভাগ মেয়েদের আরকি। অ্যান্ড এই জিনিসগুলা যেমন আম ডিফারেন্সেস গুলো না এত স্টার্ক, চোখে পড়ার মতন, যে একটা ছেলের কাজ কাজ, একটা মেয়ের সেম কাজ কিন্তু কাজ না। একটা ছেলে যদি আউট অফ টাউন যেতে চায় ঢাকায়, মানে এখন মেবি আই লাইক টু বিলিভ দ্যাট থিংস আর চেঞ্জিং। কিন্তু আমি জানি যে গ্রোইং আপ আমার এনি ডে আমার যারা ছেলে ফ্রেন্ডরা ছিল তাদের জন্য গোয়িং আউট অফ টাউন ফর ওয়ার্ক would be way more easier than the female friends that I had. কিন্তু ২ জনই কিন্তু কাজের জন্য কিন্তু বাইরে যাচ্ছে। হ্যাঁ? So I had colleagues confide in me যে আম মানে একটু ২ রাতের জন্য একটু বাইরে যেতে হবে শহরের। এর জন্য বাসার মধ্যে পুরো আগুন লেগে গেছে। Who's going to take care of the children? Who's gonna take care of the kids? So
yeah,
I think I want to tie this back to what you said about courage, fearlessness, ওই টাইমটা when you were writing at the magazine or when you were working more as a journalist than you were back then. It was just something that, like it happened because there was less of a choice, right?
right, exactly. You're
And
kind of thrown into the fire and you just have to find your way through it, right? So yeah, it's something that just happened, but at the same time, I think me and you, আমাদের সবারই একটু cognizant হইতে হইছে যে, oh, if you have to survive in this corporate world in Dhaka, তোমার এই সবও navigate করতে হবে. You
yeah.
have to understand that there will be times when people will not
Mm,
take you seriously, and it may be because of your gender, your class, whatever it is, but in those moments is when you should have courage and faith in yourself, right?
yeah.
So, yeah, I'm glad you and I both learned that lesson.
That is, um, challenging waters.
Yeah.
Uh, Kintu also I feel I totally agree with this, and I also feel that it is if people see courage in women, in Bangladeshi women, a huge part
Mhm.
of it is understanding that that courage, that fearlessness stems from the fact that most of the time we don't have a choice. We don't have
Right.
the option to not be courageous. We don't have the option to not be fearless, right? আমরা তো safe feel করি না। আমরা safe feel করি না to be out there, রাস্তা ক্রস করতেছি বাড্ডার মধ্যে, and রাস্তা ক্রস করার মাঝে আমাদের ইচ্ছা করে না হাসতে। আমরা কমফোর্টেবল না হাসতে, বিকজ আমরা জানি যে আমরা না হাসলেও আমরা ওই যে আমাদের যে একটা angry face থাকে, যেটা actually default setting হয়ে গেছে for most women in Bangladesh, right? যেটা রাস্তার মধ্যে থাকলে আমাদের থাকে, সেটা it's not out of fun. It's because আমি জানি যে আমার এই ফেসটা থাকলেও I'm going to be very prone to being assaulted. এই ফেসটা না থাকলে তো কি হবে আমি জানি। It's a proverb, right? Women are emotional. It's something that we've grown up hearing. But what is behind that? What has driven women as a collective to be emotional? Maybe it's time to dive into that as well and analyze that. And what is your definition of emotional? Let's start there, right? Like in terms of talking about the society, etc. And once again, like when you're thinking of courage and you're thinking of fearlessness, that's what it brings me back to. it's expressing these emotions to me is also courage.
I
That's
think
also
my definition of courage pretty much comes from my mother. কারণ আমার মা, if anybody knows my mom, they know you can't make her be quiet when she wants to say something. আমার মা যদি কিছু বলতে চায় বলেই ছাড়বে।
হ্যাঁ,
And so being with her growing up, I saw how she was a working mother. A lot of the time she was a single working mother. And so আমি দেখছি আমার মা কতটা কষ্ট করতে হয়েছে in order to just be heard sometimes. But what she taught me was it's not about exactly what you're trying to say every time, right? It's about who you are and how you want to present yourself. And so that's pretty much the idea that I carry around with me. যে I'm not going to let anyone stop me from saying what I want to say.
yeah,
Right? আমি আমার যেটা বলার আমি ওটা বলেই ছাড়বো। পরে যেটা হবে ওটা পরে দেখা যাবে। Right? And I
totally.
think that to me is courage. Knowing that there may be negative consequences, you might be uncomfortable. You know, people shun you. People don't like people who are constantly talking about, things that are uncomfortable. Things are, taboo a lot of the time.
Yeah, yeah,
Especially when the student movement started in Bangladesh, my mom wasn't quiet. She was on
right.
social media talking about everything that was happening. And so I followed her lead and I was like, I'm going to be who I am in this situation and I'm going to be loud. And, Jahar hobe, like, you have to use your discernment, but at the end of the day, you want to be who you are. And I want to live in this world as who I am. And I'm not going to sugarcoat things. মানুষের জন্য, softly আস্তে কথা বলবো না. I'm just going to say what I think is important to say.
I love that. And that is such a big show of courage. কারণ আমরা যারা বিদেশে থেকে speak up করছি student movement এর সময় বাংলাদেশে, very different. The fear or the anxiety that we felt is very different from auntie who spoke up from Dhaka, because
Yeah,
the
totally.
fear, the risk of being picked up and taken away and like literally killed, not even exaggerating, literally killed, was so real on a whole different level. And that is courage, isn't it? That is fearlessness. And that brings me to a question, like a topic that you and I have talked about again and again, and I can't wait for people to hear this, which is the global crisis that we've seen over the last 1 year, whether that's Palestine or Bangladesh, right? When it comes to, let's say, Palestine and Bangladesh, how would you say that these global crises have actually defined or redefined your sense of courage and fearlessness?
That's a really good question.
Well, I can't wait to hear the answer to this. I can't wait for people to hear this.
So I think Bangladesh and Palestine has always had kind of a symbiotic relationship, right?
Mm.
So before Bangladesh was liberated, Bangladeshis would actually communicate with Palestinians who were in much of the same plight. So we were already communicating with Palestinians. We were exchanging notes on how we can get liberation. And so I think there's a very powerful, almost spiritual tie
Yeah.
between these two groups of once colonized peoples. And I always knew that. I was very cognizant of how important Palestine was. But I think for the past few decades, I fell into, you go into survival mode. আমার বিয়ে
অবশ্যই।
হয়েছে,
হ্যাঁ।
graduated, আমার নিজের বাসা, নিজের সংসার তখন মানে তৈরি করতেছি, বড় করতেছি।
হুম,
Um, but after October 7th, it was kind of like a veil was taken off, right? হঠাৎ করে আমার মনে হচ্ছিল, oh, like this has been happening the whole time. And it's important that we speak up.
yeah.
Um, so তখনই I kind of went into action. I was like, কি করা যায় to help, the people in Palestine. But as time went on, I started seeing যে being in America especially, you see that a lot of people don't know about what's happening.
হুম,
And then there's a lot of people that know, but they've kind of been desensitized to all of this, right? They don't look into the specifics of what is going on. They don't look into all these connections that Palestine has to American imperialism and American weapons manufacturing. এইসব তো অনেকেই research করে না, চিন্তা করে না, careও করে না অনেক সময়.
হুম,
So I thought it was very important, me and my husband both, to be extremely loud and extremely vocal on social media so that our thinking was, Jay, if people knew what was going on, if people knew about all of these connections, then they will spur into action, right? Then they will donate, they will protest, like that was the idea. But it quickly, like, we started to understand, oh, this isn't a information problem. This isn't, a problem of people not knowing. It's very much a problem of what people think is actionable in a way, right? অনেকেই আছে যারা অনেক comfortable ওদের life নিয়ে. They have their own things to worry about, which is understandable. But being Bangladeshi, I think a lot of us have been taught about what it means to be revolutionary in spirit, what it means to take action in these kinds of times. And so I feel like my identity as a Bangladeshi, especially a Bangladeshi who has very close ties to the land still, my mother still lives there. I go back whenever I can. Being a Bangladeshi, I understood that this wasn't a moment in time where I could just sit back. So being who I was like, I need to do something. And I joined local Palestinian youth movements. I started protesting, and my husband he does social media. I try to do social media, even though I'm not that great at it. But I think, to circle back to your question, the reason that Bangladesh and Palestine have this symbiotic relationship at the end of the day is because we understand each other's struggle. I look at Palestinians, ami amar bap, ma, nana, nanu, like I see them in the Palestinians.
Absolutely. Oh, I just
right?
Yeah.
So I was like, of course I'm going to speak up. Of course I'm going to do whatever possible to help the situation. And so that's where my mind was at. I was like, Palestine, Bangladesh, it's all the same thing, right? We're the same people. We're all people fighting for liberation, sovereignty, freedom. And if you don't speak up in those times, when are you going to speak up, right?
Yeah. Yes.
Bangladeshi hoyo, we all have family members. I think the last I heard, it was like every single family in Bangladesh had lost someone through the liberation war.
মানে সবার কোনো না কোনো একটা ties আছে direct. Yes.
So like looking at Palestine, I was like, this is Bangladesh. This is totally like, it's the same people, the same struggle. And if you're not speaking up for the Palestinians, then you're not speaking up for your own people either. It was as simple as that.
Absolutely. I know personally that I have lost friendships. I've just fallen out of communication with a lot of people that I used to communicate with regularly, because ওরা আমার স্পেসটা বা আমি যে স্পেসটা নিয়ে যা বলতে চাচ্ছি সেটাকে ওরা appreciate করতেছে না, অথবা ওরা মনে করতেছে যে আমি আমার বাবলের মধ্যে ঠিক আছি. Listening to Nusrat would mean having to bring myself out of that bubble and think about other problems. Yeah. এখন সেটা হতেই পারে. I have no issues with that. You do you, bro. I really don't mind. And I am not one for judging. So you are absolutely entitled to feeling that way and experiencing that, right? But also, it's so important to remember that if I'm cutting you that slack, you also cut me that slack, right? And মানে তুমি ডিস্টার্ব হও, অসুবিধা নাই, মানে আমার শো অফ কারেজ, আমার শো অফ সাহসে যদি তোমার ইন্টিমিডেটেড ফিল করো বা তুমি যদি ডিস্টার্বড হও বা তোমার যদি এনি কাইন্ড অফ ডিসকমফর্ট অর আনইজ লাগে, সেটা লাগতেই পারে। কিন্তু just like I'm giving you the space to be who you are, you also give me the space to be and express the way I want to and be who I am, without having to necessarily force our two worlds to collide. Maybe they're not meant to collide, and that's okay. That's called coexisting, right? And that's also such a beautiful thing that I feel that Palestine and Bangladesh in recent times has really, really taught me. And since we're talking about courage and fear, how would you say, because, okay, so Palestine and October 7th, 2023, and everything that followed, and I know that you were really, and you continue to show up for Palestine so wholeheartedly, so passionately, and you were at the front speaking up for Palestine from day dot, right? And then out of nowhere comes Bangladesh student movement. And then the student movement happens, and literally overnight, আমরা কিন্তু thrown in the face of fire. মানে it's like those moments that you talked about, যে কিছু কিছু moment আসে যেখানে আমাদের choice নাই. Fearlessness is the only choice. Courage is the only choice. কিন্তু আমরা কিন্তু student movement-এর সময় দেখতে পেলাম যে once again, very much like Palestine, সবাই কিন্তু কথা বলে নাই. কিন্তু let's talk about you. তুমি কথা বললা. Knowing that you have mom back home, right? Who can literally come into the fire for this. Literally, she
Right.
will be paying the price for this. You will not, because you are in a safe space where you can actually speak up about the government, the then fascist regime, which was Sheikh Hasina, without coming into, like an absolute,
Physical harm
yeah,
initially. Yeah.
physical harm. And so that must take a different level of courage. What would you say, and like what in your opinion would you say really kept you rooted in that courage, because you didn't stop talking?
Right.
Yeah.
Again, I think it was who my mother is. Um, when the internet was cut off and we
Yeah, the
weren't able
shutdown. Mm,
to reach our families, আমার তো পুরা মাথা like খারাপ হয়ে গেছে। আমার মা
mm,
তখন একা,
mm.
and she lives in a part of town where she doesn't have anybody close to her. I'm not being able to reach her on the phone. I don't know if she's okay. I don't know if someone is like going to raid the house. Like আমাদের কোনো idea ছিল না situation কিরকম।
সেফটিও ছিল না, এগুলো কোনো এক্সাজারেশনও না, these were happening.
Right, exactly. I had to take 2 weeks off work. I was like losing my mind.
Yeah.
And in the midst of all of this, when I was finally able to call my mom one day, the line was like crackling. I could barely hear her. And all she could tell me was post against Sheikh Hasina on Facebook. She was
Oh
like,
my
make just make posts. And I was like, are you insane? And she's like, nah, তুমি সব জায়গায় যেখানে পারো post করতে থাকো. It's just like, wow.
And this is a woman who's living in Dhaka. Literally, it was like a warlike zone at the moment.
Yeah,
And
and she's Aka. So that's why I was like, okay, if my mom's on the same page, I'm gonna go all out. And I was posting on Facebook. I was trying to get a hold of, আমাদের এখানে যে senator
yeah,
আছে, governor আছে.
yeah.
I was calling their offices. And then after everything happened, after Sheikh Hasina was fled, you know, I was actually talking to another friend of mine who also had parents in Dhaka. So ও বলতেছিল যে আমার বাপ মা কিছু বলে নাই at the time, which is understandable, like
হুম, 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 হুম। অনেকজনই বলে নাই। And এখন আমি এটা বুঝি যে এটা আসলে সবাই বলার সিচুয়েশনে ছিল না।
exactly. Not everybody had a way to say something, and
Yeah,
there could have been very, very
not
serious
at stake.
consequences.
Yeah.
But while talking to her, she was like, they don't have the privilege of having so much hope like we have. It's easier for us to hope, not being in the country, not being in like the line of fire, basically.
Yeah. Yeah.
That really hit me. That was a moment when I had to sit down and be like, oh, not everyone's parents are like my mom, like not everyone is in this like very accepting bubble of like revolutionary work and like
Yeah.
being loud and risking everything, basically. And I was like, I have to understand, this is a lesson for me. Not everybody is at that place in their life. Not everybody has had those lessons, and not everybody is in a position to be able to risk,
Hmm.
everything.
Hmm.
So that was one point where I was kind of scared. I was like, oh, if I'm speaking, I should be thinking about not only myself and my mother, but I also have my in-laws. I have my extended family to think about as well,
Wow.
right? So
Yes, yes.
that was kind of a sobering moment when I did feel a sense of fear, like what I'm saying and what I'm doing can have very real consequences for others. That-
Absolutely.
But at the end of the day, no matter how I slice it, আমি যেইভাবেই চিন্তা করি এই বিষয়টা নিয়ে, আমার সবসময় মনে হয় and I think মনে হবে যে it's worth it.
Yeah.
You're speaking for the liberation of a people. You're speaking for human rights. You're speaking for all these very, very important, tangible things. And n- I will always be the kind of person that just can't shut up. Like আমার বলতেই হবে এই জিনিস।
Same.
So
And
it's understanding what the risks are and accepting them, right, as you can.
that is, oh, you just gave, anyways, it's almost like you gave up one of the other podcast topics that I have coming up. And I can't wait to delve into that. But what you just said about your mom, right? এটা কিন্তু অনেক বড় একটা privilege to have parents. I think আমার জন্য student movement, the biggest thing that it taught me, right? The biggest thing that it taught me is that anything is possible when you raise brave children. That's what it taught me. Because I was literally looking at all these kids, like বাচ্চা বাচ্চা ওদের বয়সে এভাবে করে রাস্তায় গিয়ে একদম দাঁড়ায় যাওয়া, just in the line of fire, that sure, come at me. আমার মনে হয় না I could. I honestly don't think. এখন obviously life different একটা phase বয়স হইছে and all of that compared to, like when I was 18 or 19. So এখন I think of things differently. And I remember when the student movement was going on, I said to Shabab, my husband, that when we have children, we're just going to make sure of one thing, that we raise brave kids. That's it. মানুষকে এটা সবসময় বলতাম যে, have you seen me with Palestine? How can you in your wildest imagination think I'm going to stay shut for Bangladesh?
Exactly.
Right? Like, how have you seen me? Do you know me?
Do you know me?
Have you seen my Instagram? Have you seen my socials? Have you had 1-2 minute chat with me in the last 9 months? How in your wildest imagination did you think I'm going to be silent with Bangladesh, right? And also, tell me this. I would love for you to tell me, would you say Palestine taught you to be more fearless when it comes to Bangladesh?
Oh yeah, for sure.
Tell
So
me.
dove right into doing activist work for Palestine. I met a lot of Palestinians and I've talked to them directly, both Palestinians who are in Gaza right now and
Yeah.
Palestinians that live near me that I have met face to face. And they have turned revolutionary work into like I don't even have a word for it. They live it, they breathe it. They even have a word for it. It's called Sumud. It means steadfast.
Steadfastness.
Sumud. M-U-D. It's an Arabic word. And from them, I learned what steadfastness is, because they were like, doing this work isn't just work, it's who you are.
Yeah.
And it reminds me of what my mom said after I called her after Sheikh Hasina fled and, Bangladesh was newly liberated again. She told me a story of how my grandfather was a freedom fighter.
Yeah.
And he actually, he knew a lot of the people that were in government that, worked these different kinds of jobs and whatnot. And there was a point in time when he cut ties with all those people because he saw what was happening. He saw the dictatorship literally like forming in front of his eyes. And at the time, he cut off those ties and he stayed true to who he was. I'm not going to go into details because,
Yeah.
But the one thing my mother told me on that phone call was, remember whose granddaughter you are, remember who you are. And that has stayed with me for so long. Whether I'm doing work for Palestine or some other cause, whatever it is, I always think back to my mother saying that, remember who you are. And who I am is someone who is always going to keep speaking, doing as much work as I can. And, you learn so much about what it means to do this kind of work, not only from the people like I was saying, you learn this work from other people, from people that you get connected with. Like I learned a lot from you while we work together, while we have our conversations. And I'm sure you learn certain things from me.
100%.
And this is what it is, right? It's exchanging energy. It's learning from each other and building that community. So yeah, I've definitely learned a lot from Palestine, but I've also learned a lot from other Bangladeshis as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And for me, like just what we were talking about earlier as well, I was so grateful for Palestine when the Bangladesh student movement happened, because it standing up for Palestine taught me how to stand up for Bangladesh. I was going to do it anyways, but standing up for Palestine gave me the tools and resources. Like I didn't have to wait to brainstorm. I jumped into it. I'm like, okay, write to the Senate. যতগুলা গভর্নমেন্ট অফিসিয়ালকে পারবো চিঠি লেখা শুরু করি, প্রোটেস্ট অ্যারেঞ্জ করা শুরু করি, মানুষের কাছে বলা শুরু করি, সোশ্যাল মিডিয়ার পাওয়ার ইউজ করা শুরু করি, and all of that, right? And that once again brings you to the fact that separation is an illusion. এটা কিন্তু আমি ট্রুলি বিশ্বাস করি। We're all connected. আমরা সবাই connected. So এখানে যতদিন Palestine free না হবে, if you are under the impression that because just look at what's happening. একটা মানে নেতানিয়াহুর মতন মানুষ কিন্তু 10টা ওর মতন মানুষকে ইন্সপায়ার করতেছে। আবার একটা বাংলাদেশের স্টুডেন্ট রেভলিউশন 10 জায়গায় স্টুডেন্ট রেভলিউশন ট্রিগার করতেছে। What does it mean? It means we're all connected. At the end of the day, we're all connected. Right? And one thing, I know that we're at the very end of our conversation. one thing that I would love to end on is I wanted to share something, which is recently someone asked me, we were talking about Bangladesh, and said, wow, Nusrat, that's very interesting. Tell me, where does fascism show up in your life? Right? And বলো যে তোমার লাইফে তোমার relationships, তুমি as a human being, your dynamic in relationships with others, ওটার মধ্যে fascism কোথায় rise করে? Which of the dynamics in relationships reflect fascism? I cannot explain what happened after that, because that one question literally, and I know we were talking about this, it sent me on a trip, man. মানে পুরা life মনে হলো unravel করলো, কারণ it made me take a really long and hard look at actually the relationships and dynamics I have in my life. And what that translates to basically is that আমরা আমাদের কোন relationships এ আমাদের যে power, like আমার Nusrat, the power that I owe to myself, and যেটা একান্তই আমার নিজের, কোন relationships এ বা কোন dynamics এ বা কোন আমার লাইফের aspects এ আমি সেই পাওয়ারটা দিয়ে দিছি আরেকজনের হাতে। So much so that আমি মানে আমি just like we gave away power to Sheikh Hasina for years, right? That's what fascism is. যেখানে আমরা আমাদের পাওয়ারটাকে, it's not so much as we've obviously, like for example, when you look at Bangladesh's context, people like you, people like me, আমরা তো চাচ্ছিলাম সে কত বছর ধরে যে she needs to leave, right? But our hands were tied. Kintu, this is where we didn't give up power, in the fact that we never stopped talking. And so much of, whether that was through our writing or whether that was through conversations that we had with each other, we never stopped inspiring each other to keep talking, to keep having, মানে কথা বলতে থাকতে হবে। আমরা কিন্তু কখনো হোপফুল যে consistently ছিলাম সেটা না, কিন্তু ওইটাই I think that's where you don't completely give up your power, in the fact that তুমি মানুষকে উঠায় নিয়ে যাচ্ছ, গুম করতেছো, খুন করতেছো, সব করতেছো, করো। আমার কথা আমি বলতে থাকবো। And it's মানুষের কিন্তু একটা ভুল ধারণা আমার কাছে মনে হয় যে people like you, people like me, and like a lot of other people in the world, is that when we speak up, আমরা ভয় পাই না। কিন্তু ভয় কিন্তু থাকে অনেক, right? At least আমার ভয় কিন্তু সবসময় থাকে। ভিতরে কিন্তু I have lost track of how many times, বিশেষ করে যে শেখ হাসিনা রেজিমে, আমি একটা জিনিস লিখছি স্ট্যাটাস, কতবার ওটা ডিলিট করছি, কতবার আবার রিটাইপ করছি, লিখছি, পোস্ট করছি, গিয়ে আবার ডিলিট করছি। বিকজ আমার বাপ আমার রুমের মধ্যে সে তুলকালাম লাগাই দিছে যে হোয়াট আর ইউ ডুইং? তোমাকে উঠায় নিয়ে গেলে আমি কি করব? এই ফিয়ার গুলো তো অনেক রিয়েল ছিল। এবং এখনো অ্যাকচুয়ালি আছে। I'm not gonna say যে জাস্ট ছিল, এখনো আছে। অন্য ওয়েজ এন্ড ফর্মস এ আছে। বাট এই যে courage is fearlessness, what's your take on this? Like, do you get scared when you're speaking up about something which requires courage? Or is your definition of courage, or even fearlessness, tell me this, does fearlessness have fear?
I think the fear is constant. It's always there. But in answer to your question about how does fascism show up in my life, I think it's important to note that fascism is everywhere, and to combat it, you have to start with yourself, right? You have to decolonize your mind. You have to question, আমি যে এই behavior গুলো করতেছি, or আমি যে এইভাবে চিন্তা করি, কেন চিন্তা করি এইভাবে? Like, who put these ideas in my head? Was it an idea I came up with myself, or was this something that came from propaganda, or came from, lived experiences that I hadn't processed? So there's always that fear, because doing decolonization work or anti-fascism work is shadow work, basically. I don't know how spiritual people are, but I believe if you're going to go against these really big concepts of fascism and colonization and imperialism, the first place to start is your mind. Manushjon, they don't really think about where they've picked up all of these ideas and ideologies and behaviors from, right? Like, it's very subtle. People don't always know when they've been propagandized. So আমার প্রথম জিনিস ছিল যে tackling that fear, acknowledging that, yes, I am scared. There's a lot of fears that I have. Why do I have those fears? And how can I use that fear to at least, if not make the world a better place, but make myself a better person?
Absolutely.
Right? So for me, yeah, fearlessness definitely still has fear. You're going to feel uncomfortable and sad and upset, and things are probably never going to go your way. But I think you will agree with this, আমার সাথে, যে we don't do this work because we're on the winning side, right?
No,
We don't expect to win. We do it because our morality, our values, who we are as human beings aligns with those behaviors, right? So we align with being revolutionaries, we align with being loud people, we align with being our own sovereign human beings. And that's just something I continue to work on, and I think it never ends, right? As time goes on and more things happen around the world, that's going to have to stand the test of time. You're constantly going to have to come up against your fear, come up against these ideas of fascism and, imperialism and whatnot. And at the end of the day, whatever happens, you have to remember that defines you. However you act in these situations is what is going to define you. And, you know, however way you deal with that fear is going to be your legacy.
That does bring us to the end of this amazing conversation, Zarifa. There's so many people who need to learn, who want to start নিজেদের জন্য কথা বলা, নিজেদের জন্য স্ট্যান্ড আপ করা। সো এমন কেউ যদি শুনতে থাকে এই পডকাস্টটা এই মুহূর্তে, যে অ্যাকচুয়ালি শিখতে চাচ্ছে, জানতে চাচ্ছে যে কিভাবে আমি নিজের জন্য কথা বলবো, নিজের জন্য স্ট্যান্ড আপ করবো। আম তোমার যদি ওদেরকে কোনো একটা অ্যাডভাইস দিতে হয়, একটা অ্যাকশন পয়েন্ট যে এখানে স্টার্ট করো, where would you say?
I would just say, start with yourself. Believe in yourself, right? Everything starts with your mind and who you think you are. Whoever you think you are is who you are, right? So figure out who you are and then just act. It doesn't have to be something big. It can be something as small as, I don't know, joining a local group or
Yeah.
donating $5 to some charity or saving a stray cat, whatever it is. Just make sure you're sure about what you're doing and how it reflects back on who you are as a person. It doesn't have to be a big thing, guys. Just act and keep getting to know yourself, right? Yeah, do the
Yeah.
work. Do the shadow work, guys.
Do the work. Save the world by doing the work, please, because it all adds up, right? And I always say to people that, কারণ আমি এরকম অনেক প্রশ্ন পাই যে um, মাঝে মধ্যে মানুষ এসে আমাকে বলে যে, ও তুমি এত বোল্ডলি কথা বলো, আমার অনেক ভালো লাগে। And আমি ওদেরকে বলি, মাঝে মধ্যে চুপ থাকি যে, oh my God, you've no idea
You
how
don't
scared I am
know.
inside.
It's just surface level, bro.
সারফেস লেভেল, বিকজ মাঝে মধ্যে আমার হাত পা কাঁপে একটা কথা বলতে গেলে। কারণ আমি জানি যে এটার অনেক রিয়াল কনসিকুয়েন্সেস থাকতে পারে। তো আমি বোল্ডলি বলতেছি, মানে আমার ভিতরে মানে এভরিথিং ইজ জাস্ট মাশ, ভয়ে হয়তোবা বা নার্ভাসনেস এ। কিন্তু চেষ্টা করি গলাটা যেন সোজা থাকে।
Right.
So, like, I think if I had to tell someone, Jay, where do you start if you want to start standing up or speaking up for yourself? কোথায় start করা যেতে পারে? It is just what you said. Just start being true to yourself. যে এইটা কি আমাকে কমফোর্টেবল ফিল করাচ্ছে নাকি আনকমফোর্টেবল ফিল করাচ্ছে? আর যদি আমাকে আনকমফোর্টেবল ফিল করায় থাকে, কাউকে বলতে হবে না। জাস্ট নিজের মধ্যেই আমি এই জিনিসটাকে হ্যাঁ কেন বলতেছি? Why am I saying yes to something that doesn't make me feel good in my body, in my mind, right? Find out the answer to that. And it's so uncomfortable. It is so uncomfortable because it requires you to move out of, but that's fearlessness. It's always going to have fear. That's courage. It's
Right.
always going to have
Do
fear.
it anyway. Do it scared. Do it uncomfortable. Do it
Yeah.
whatever.
Just do it. Just do it. হ্যাঁ, হয়তোবা অনেক সম্পর্ক একেবারে ভেঙে চুরমার হয়ে যাবে। হয়তোবা অনেকজন কথা বলা বন্ধ করে দিবে। হয়তোবা the familiar things যেটা আমরা জীবনে we know, like আমাদের লাইফ একটা রুটিনে চলে, একটা particular way তে চলে। সেই সবকিছু হয়তোবা একটু নড়চড় হয়ে যাবে। কিন্তু যদি মানে fearless হতে হয়, আমার কাছে মনে হয় যদি courageous হতে হয় তাহলে সেই ফিয়ারটাকে সাথে রেখেই ওটা নিয়ে কাজ করতে হবে। That's it. The fear is always gonna be there. So if anyone's waiting for the fear to go away, newsflash, it's never gonna go away. It's always gonna be there. And maybe it's healthy, maybe it's a good thing. Maybe that's what's going to keep you moving forward, right? And on that note, Zarifa, thank you so much for sitting through the many technical issues today and being so patient.
I get it. I
Oh
totally
my
get it.
God! কি হইল
Thank you
লাগে, but
so much. for thinking of me and involving me in this. This was such a great opportunity. And as always, we have such great conversations. So I loved
আমি
you.
আমি তোমাকে ছ্যাঁচড়ায় আবার নিয়ে আসবো আরো অনেক conversations এর জন্য because this conversation alone, my God, wait till I send you another email. It's gonna be mad whenever you have the time, of course. I can't wait. But yes, thank you so much for your time, and I really hope যারা যারা শুনতে পারলো আমাদের এই কনভারসেশনটা I really hope that you take away, even if it's just one thing, একটা জিনিস হলেও যেন you take away today that empowers you, that encourages you to become a better version of you. All right. Thank you and have a great day. Zarifa, say bye.